We're asked to solve this one, and we've got to check for extraneous solutions. That's going to be important on every one of these that you do. This one is fairly complex, which is the reason why I chose to do a video on this one. The very first thing whenever you get to one of these rational expression or rational equations is to try to determine what the lowest common denominator is between all of these. This will make your life a lot easier. In this case, let's see, I've got a 3. They all have 3's, so it's definitely 3. This one's got an x, this one has an x squared and an x squared. So the lowest common denominator in this case is going to be 3x squared, and that's going to be very, very important. Now that we've identified what the lowest common denominator is, and it sounds weird, but I want you to multiply each one of these 3 aspects here by that lowest common denominator. Okay, so we're going to multiply 3x squared, which is our lowest common denominator, by this first one, x minus 5 over 3x. Then we're going to go 3x squared multiplied by this second one here, 1 over 3x squared. And then finally we've got 3x squared multiplied by x plus 1 over 3x squared. Now, some of you may view this as multiplying by the top only, which is fine because this is the same thing as 3x squared over 1, which means this does go on top. And that's okay if you want to think of it that way. Now, I'm going to rewrite this just so it's maybe a little bit easier to understand for the next part that we're going to do here. Okay, all I did is I wrote it basically on top, and if you want to think about multiplying all these on top, that's fine. That's a good way to do it. 3x squared times 1, 3x squared times x plus 1. Notice I have parentheses here. This one I didn't. This one I sectioned it out. 3x squared is the same thing as 3 times x times x. I just sectioned it out because it's going to make it a little bit easier for the next step that we're going to do. Okay, now that we've done this, we've got our lowest common denominator. We've multiplied it by all the numerators, the thing on top. Now we're going to see if we can cross any of these out. You notice how I have a 3x squared on top and a 3x squared on bottom. That's going to make it really nice, and that's why we chose to do this method. We're going to get rid of all of these fractions. Math is sometimes a lot easier when we don't have to deal with fractions. So I'm going to go through here and look at here, and I'm going to start on the left-hand side. I've got 3's on tops and bottoms, so I'm going to cross off those 3's first thing. Okay, now I've got an x on top and bottom as well. I'm going to cross that off. Now remember, this is multiplication here, so we can do this. That works out just fine. I can't cross anything more off in this first set. This second set here, I've got a 3x squared on top and bottom. I can cross both of those off. Now, a lot of errors occur here when students think that this one's gone. It's just a 0. It's not. Remember, there is still a 1 here. That's going to become important for the next step. All right, moving on down here, I've got a 3x squared on top and bottom. I'm going to cross both of those off. By doing this, when we're using this method, we will not have any more fractions. The next step, they are gone. All right, so let's rewrite this here. Here's what I'm left with. Okay, I crossed everything off. I've got an x times x minus 5. Then I've got just a 1. This is important. That 1 has to stay here. And then over here, I just have an x plus 1. Notice I do not have any more fractions. This is my what's left of my equation here. All right, now what I'm going to do is go ahead and distribute this x here. X times x gives me x squared. And x times negative 5 gives me negative 5x. Okay, and everything else remain the same. Well, in doing these types of problems, this is a quadratic. What we want to do is get everything onto one side. So I'm going to move these two, this x and this 1, onto the other side. So I'm going to subtract x and I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. And the whole goal here is to get this to equal 0. All right, so let's do that now. Let's see, 5x minus x gives me negative 5x minus x gives me negative 6x. And positive 1 and negative 1 give me 0, so that's it. And then what I'm left with on this side is just 0. So now I've got an x squared minus 6x, and this equals 0. Now, we can take this and plug this into the quadratic formula. That will work. Our a value in this case is 1, our b value is negative 6, and our c value is 0. So we can plug that into the quadratic equation. It's easier if we can see if there's a like term. In this case, there is. They both share an x in common. I'm going to go ahead and factor out that x right now. So I factor out the x. This gives me x times x minus 6. And these two here are equivalent. All I did is I took the x out. Okay, and that makes it a little bit easier for my next step here. I rewrote it over here. It's the exact same thing that I've got down here. I haven't changed that at all. Okay, now when I'm solving this one, I can set each of these equal to 0. So that means I'm going to have an x equals 0 and an x minus 6 equals 0. Now I can go ahead and continue to solve this, get my x all by itself. That means I'm going to add 6 to both sides. If I add 6 to both sides, that gives me x equals 6. Okay, now we're thinking, okay, the answer is 0 and 6. Remember, we have to check for extraneous solutions. If we took 6 and plug it in, it actually does work. If we took and plugged in 0, it does not work. And the reason why 0 does not work is if I plug that in for x right here, I would end up with 0 squared, and 0 squared is just 0, and 3 times 0 is 0. Well, we can't divide by 0. We can't have 0 on this denominator at all. So 0, in fact, does not work. Our only answer on this one is going to be just plain old 6. Okay, and again, we have to plug each one of these in to make sure that they're going to work. Anytime you have a 0 here on the denominator, by the time you plugged it back in and done all your calculations, if you end up with a 0 there, it doesn't work. That one won't. So that one will not be included in your answer. Just 6 is your answer in this case.